Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Good morning, everybody. Myself some tea. Hey, Chris. Hey, Karen and Kathy. Hey, Rodney. Hey, Martin. Hey, Ian, Aviva, Heather, Mona, Jerry, Kathy.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel.
Hey, Lisa over on YouTube.
And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Sky.
Fine feather, I like that. Got a fine plate of good leftovers in my kitchen right now, so. Hey, Todd over on Twitch. The Facebook messages kind of froze. I'm still getting the ones on YouTube and everything else. Freezing up a little bit earlier than usual today, messages-wise. I guess I'll have to go here. Hey, Gene. Weirdly, I'm only getting the messages. I'm not getting the Facebook messages right now. Hang on, I'll fix that. There we go. Hey, Roy. Hey, Mike. Hey, Bridget, Georgia, Joanne, Heather. Hey, Dad. Hey, Laura. And whoever it didn't scroll up to there. Hey, Dina. There they go. Hey, Casey. Hey, Gail. It's a thing that happens sometimes on the restream when I'm doing the multiple platforms. Hey, Susan. Hey, Savannah. Kathleen. Hey, Betsy. Karen, that's alright. You can catch them later. Oh, yeah, I got many tours to do. Hey, Chuck. Hey, Gina. Gina, 3 chickens. All right. I was just at my parents' house outside of Atlanta where people are allowed to have roosters. I thought they had werewolves in the neighborhood. Hey, Vanya. Hey, Laura. The title of the episode where they gang write a teen novel is my favorite Simpsons episode. It's such a devastating portrayal of the book industry. And it's fully accurate, too. Hey, Steve. Hey, Brian. I've been dragged into some ghostwriting stuff lately. It's going to be making me miserable for about 3 weeks. And it better not turn out like Kansas City. Hey, Becky. Hey, Dwayne. Season 23, the book job. They can still knock it out of the park occasionally in season 23. Hey, Heather. Hey, Octavio. I've been looking up those apartments that have a view of the grave of Kenny Rogers in Atlanta. The studios are $1,800. That is nuts. Thank you, Steve.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
Joanne, don't worry, there'll be plenty more walking tours coming all through summer. Sue, I'm back in Chicago now. Note my living room. Hey, Tony. Hey, Jenna. Hey, Patricia. Hey, Toby. Hey, Nancy. Morning, Patricia. Karen, yes, some years ago. Hey, Laura. Hey, John. You can get a view of an apartment with quiet neighbors who know when to walk away and when to run. Hey, Mike. Morning, everybody. It's frozen on me again. Hey, Chuck. I think we're way back here. Hang on. Once I get started, this isn't such an issue, but the thing's been freezing on me a lot, comment-wise. Emily Dillon show was great, in particular, the best version of my own version of you I have ever heard. Kathleen, yes you can. Alright, trying to get it so I can see where the comments are. The app is freezing on me. There we go. Hey, Ann.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of...
There we go. Oh, hey, Kathleen. And Kathleen in Half Moon Bay. Count, haven't started the ghost tours up for the year yet. They'll be up pretty soon, I'm sure. I think with my first school group next weekend, I have to do an Untouchables tour. Or 2 weekends hence. Yeah, 2 Sundays from now, I probably won't be able to do the tour because I gotta do the school group. Hey, Susan. All right. Machine's kind of a mess today. Congrats on the new car, Sue. Hey, Renee. Hey, Dana. Hey, Bob. Hey, Lauren. Hey, Grandma Bell. Good seeing you all this past week. Hey, Denise. Hey, Laurie. French toast sounds good. I made some good challah French toast a couple of weeks ago. Except I think the eggs might have been bad. Oh well. Hey, Laurie.
And they all loved it. They all loved those passions when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the
Comments coming rather sporadically today. one of those things. Hey, Lenore. And the niece, hey, Lenore. There is an in-person tour next weekend, next Sunday. After the virtual tour, I will head out to Graceland and run an in-person one. Go to adamchicago.com or mysteriouschicago.com for all the links. Hey, Katie. Hey, Mary. Karen, it was. I got some leftover sesame chicken with fried rice in my refrigerator right now from last night. Hey, Bill. Tonight I think I will roast a chicken. Yeah, Miles was glad to see me. Well, Priya just went and explored the third floor today, upstairs. Cold today, should be up around the 50s next Sunday, so should be okay for a tour, I hope. I'll let Benny Goodman finish up this tune. I just realized I don't have a clock up, so I'm using I've planted the phone up on the laptop. Well, I can see the comments that aren't coming out of the other ones. Hey, Bala. Hey, Ava. Tomorrow will be a 2-year anniversary for us here, you know, since the first big virtual tour. Hey, JJ. Hey, Denise. All right, that is music by Benny Goodman presented in the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. I think that means it's time we go ahead and... That's the wrong button. I'm off to a great start today. All right, everybody, welcome along. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out. I'm on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time. So I am incredibly famous. I think I was supposed to, tuck my thumbs into the lapels when I say that. Incredibly famous, and you should definitely pay attention to whatever I say. Later next month, I'll be going to L.A. to do some talking head work, possibly some stuff in New York the month after that. I got books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, and the rare collector's item, The Ghosts of Chicago. So popular that it's now a rare collector's item. So... I have also worked as a boat tour off and on. A couple of weeks ago, I posted a clip of how I dealt with the 401 North Wabash, the big silver one on the river on my old boat tours. It's up to about 370,000 views on TikTok, I think. So I figured I should probably do a regular one, see if anybody from the people joining on TikTok want to cross over. So I'm still kind of experimenting with TikTok. I'm having fun with it, but I'm not really sure that having views there translates to selling more tickets or getting more people out of these virtual tours. So it's all a big experiment. This seemed like a good one to do. It's probably the only time I'll do it virtually this year because we're going to be doing it for real. This Mystericon 2 this fall. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll start right here in the Chicago River. Well, this is Dusable Harbor, named for Chicago's first non-native settler, Jean-Baptiste Point Dusable, who came here back in the 1770s and may have looked like this. We really don't know. There's about 2 paragraphs worth of primary source documents about this guy, really. We think he was a fur trader from Haiti who came here in the 1770s, but there are those who say he was a pirate on the run from the Caribbean, or an enslaved man who escaped from someplace down south. Really, we just don't have one way or the other. This is a drawing that was made of him years and years after he left, and may or may not have anything to do with what he really looked like. But this is now a harbor named after him. One of the bridges coming up is named after him. Not to mention Lakeshore Drive, which you can see passing over here, is also now the Jean-Baptiste Dusable, Pont Dusable Lakeshore Drive. So All of what you're seeing here, though, really is effectively man-made, all the way back to a couple of bridges past here. Now, when Chicago first started growing, Lake Michigan was the beach. That's why they called it what they called Michigan Avenue, because the lake went right up to that. A lot of what you can see here is really man-made. Over on the left, Grant Park and everything you see there is really from after the Great Chicago Fire. After the fire, we had all of this rubble, dust, and ash. Don't know if you guys heard about it. We had this really big fire in 1871. They took all of that rubble, dust, and ash and pushed it out into the lake to create Grant Park and the land to the right. But it's a little more complicated what happened over on this side where the crane is, or where the crane was a couple of years ago when I filmed all of this. So what happened there was in 1888, a guy named Captain George Wellington Streeter crashed his houseboat onto the shore. In his version of the story, it was a dark and stormy night. He was working on running guns down to South America, but instead crashed into the shores of Lake Michigan. The day he said it happened was actually a clear, sunny day. But he started charging people money to dump their garbage around his ship. That's the way he told it anyway. The city was already starting to fill the land in, but he started charging people money for the dumping they were doing anyway, claimed squatters' rights, and ended up declaring this new land he had created not only his own land, but his own independent country, of which he was the emperor. Took the cops 30 years to get rid of Captain Streeter. And it wasn't just legal battles either. There were actual gunfights. He had a whole army of hobos that he had allowed to emigrate to his new country. So it wasn't until like 1919 he finally lost the Battle of Garbage Hill. Spent the last couple of years of his life selling coffee at what is now Navy Pier, what was then Municipal Pier. But right back behind these buildings on the right, we now have a life-size statue of Captain George Wellington Streeter. So that's how we treat our criminals and pirates around here. We make statues of them. Alright, so to put a couple of things in perspective, at the time Captain Streeter crashed onto the shore in 1888, there were about 1 million people living in the city. 50 years before, there had been about 3,000. So no city had ever grown quite as quickly as this did, and right during the Industrial Revolution, it might seem like a logical place for it to become the birth of the skyscraper, which is what we are, but it's not that logical if you look at the soil around here. It's a very wet, marshy soil, and older buildings were a whole lot heavier. Like you can see at the Monadnock building, the walls kind of taper outwards. The walls here are about 6 feet thick to hold up the rest of the building. You get a building like that over about 10 floors, they will start to sink into that wet, marshy soil. But we solved that. William LeBarongenny, the architect, developed what is called steel frame construction. You just build a skeleton for the building out of steel, then everything else, all of this stone, all of the glass, all of the masonry, all of that just gets draped over that like a curtain. That allowed him to build taller than anybody had ever dreamed before. And his building down below me here, the home insurance building, is by most metrics the first modern skyscraper. They tore it down in the late 1920s, depending on who you believe. In 1902, the Chicago Tribune published a huge story about how the home insurance building had just been destroyed by dinosaurs, when Chicago was invaded by hordes of prehistoric monsters dealing death and destruction. It was April Fool's Day. They had way too much fun with it over there. But as we get right up over here, we can actually do kind of a crash course in Architecture 101. Right in the middle, you can see that one that looks like a Disney villain castle, the Gothic style of architecture at the Chicago Tribune, blocking its view of the International School, which is like modernism, the building of the mid-20th century with lots of plain black rectangles. International is like modernism, but less elegant and more ugly, frankly. Right in front of us here, this plain black one is a perfect example of modernism, really. Right behind that, I'll show a picture with a better view, is 333 North Michigan, which is a good example of Art Deco. That's the architecture of the Jazz Age, the 1920s and 30s, featuring streamlined verticality and simple geometric artwork. You can see it right behind there. It looks better from this angle, though. And beyond that, we can see a little bit of the Beaux-Arts style London Guarantee Building. That was the style of the late 19th and early 20th century, which had lots of neoclassical influences, lots of columns, lots of statues. That was the style for quite a while. And now this is the Fidelity Building by Nathalie Delbois, one of only a couple of buildings designed by a woman in Chicago. Unfortunately, it's the International School of Architecture, about which I have nothing particularly interesting to say. But moving on a little bit, we'll move to our first real landmark skyscraper that we come to on this tour is the Wrigley Building, right over here with the fantastic clock on top, designed to look like a cathedral in Spain. This is from 1920 by the architects Graham Anderson, Probst, and White for the architect the builder William Wrigley Jr. William Wrigley Jr. was not an architect, he was the guy from Wrigley's Spearmint Gum. He's the guy whose name is on Wrigley Field. Now, he came to Chicago with about $30 in his pocket in the 1890s, but a generation later, he was building buildings like this. And what made him so successful wasn't just that his bubble gum was so good, it's that his advertising was so good. He was one of the first guys to have giant electric billboards all over Times Square. So when he added this building, the first real building on what was becoming the Magnificent Mile, everybody assumed he was going to have a giant Wrigley billboard there, and he just said, nope, just a bronze plaque that says Wrigley Building, nothing more. And we loved him for it. In fact, Chicagoans Al Chase of the Chicago Tribune published this big editorial just praising William Wrigley Jr. to the sky for not putting his name on the building in giant letters, like... So other architects kept building in that same style even after Art Deco became the style of the day. And that's something that architects do have to think about. How is my building going to fit into the other ones nearby? Like when Adrian Smith was designing 401 Wabash here, he had to figure, how do I make this one blend in? He did that with a little architectural tricks called contextualism. It's like the first, it's the way that architects can kind of collude with the built environment. That first setback there on the right is set at the same height as the setback on the Wrigley Building. Next setback over there is set at the same height as the black one coming up next, and the setback beyond that is set at the same height as the height of the two corncob-looking things coming up next, Marina City. This allows these buildings to blend into each other, and it makes them all look like they kind of belong together, which is a very difficult thing to do, but Adrian Smith is a very clever architect. Just beyond that, the black one coming up is the old IBM building from the late 60s, now the AMA building, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and almost the perfect example of his style. We tend to refer to him as like the father of modernism. Now, as a modernist, he used to just, he didn't like any ornamentation at all. Other people might still be doing statues. He would stand in front of his students and just hold up a brick and say, "Behold, the brick. The brick is truly something," only in a much thicker German accent that I only really do when I'm ripping on Johann Hawk. But one of his students, Bertrand Goldberg, went on to design these two corncob-looking buildings called Marina City. He believed in a lot of the theories and philosophies of modernism, but he didn't like all of the rectangles, obviously. And he wasn't just an architect. In his heart of hearts, I think he was also a bit of a city planner. I'm trying to post this thing up here so I can still see the comments. It's not working on my machine today. A bit of a city planner. He wanted to draw people back downtown. Marina City was designed to be like a city within a city. It'd have everything you need right there. There was a bowling alley in there. There was a grocery store in there, entertainment complexes, offices. Theoretically, you could live and work in the building and never have to leave. Everything you needed was right there. Introvert's paradise. They were thought of as about the most modern buildings in the world when they were built, and they still look futuristic and modern to me now. They're not quite as modern in their functionality. Cement buildings like this are where cell phone signal goes to die. Now, the use of all of that concrete ties him into the brutalist movement, the style of architecture at the time. There's a very restrained example that you see right here at 55 Wacker, the hashtag building or the pound sign building, depending on how old you are. That was the old Blue Cross building designed by Otto Stark, my next-door neighbor, and the perfect name for a brutalist architect. That's a very restrained example. Brutalism, usually we think of like hulking parking garages from the 60s, malls from the 70s, stuff like that. Marina City, there's kind of a debate as to whether that counts as brutalism. It's kind of too pretty to be brutalism. Now, over on the right is one of the older buildings that we see on the river anymore. From 1913, the Reed Murdock Building, built roughly in the Prairie School. That was a style like Frank Lloyd Wright that emphasized the horizontal more than the vertical. And if you look in between the windows, you see these design elements. Those are supposed to represent wheat shafts. One thing that Prairie School architects like to do was represent what what went on inside on the outside of the building. This was a grocery warehouse at the time. The clock tower used to be right smack in the middle of the building. It's not really there anymore. If you really look, they've had to lop off part of it when they added the LaSalle Street Bridge here, which we'll duck underneath. Everybody try to go limp or something right here. Now, coming up right on the right, this is a perfect example of the Chicago School of Architecture. That was a style that emerged in the early 20th century. They like to divide buildings into three sections, a base, a shaft, and a capital, just like an old Greek column. This one even says the Chicago School on it, but that's not because of the architect. There's like a Chicago School of Psychology in there. It was an old coffee warehouse designed by Lars Hallberg, who has a lot of buildings around the city, but they're mostly residences and private houses. This is probably his best-known skyscraper, but we very rarely give him the credit for it. Now we'll duck underneath here for a second and come to the Merchandise Mart. Art Deco from 1930 by Graham Anderson, Probst and White. These things out front that look like giant Pez dispensers are busts of the giants of merchandising. Now this was built to be Marshall Field's wholesale showroom. They sometimes call it the warehouse. Really, most of Marshall Field's business was really done in wholesaling, selling stuff to be sold in other stores. The retail flagship almost never even made them any money. It was really just for the prestige, which is still why they have flagships on Michigan Avenue and State Street today. It's more not really to make the money, it's just to build your name. Now, with these things, I always wish you could put a quarter in a slot and make them start talking. And I wish one of them was Samuel Kresge from Kmart so he could be like, blue light special on underpants in aisle 3. I'm kind of dating myself there, I know. But now, the Field Company didn't really end up owning the building very long. The Depression hit right after they built it. They wound up selling everything to Joseph Kennedy of the Kennedy family, who still own portions of land over here, including this whole space, which is known as Wolf Point. This new building is called Wolf Point East. We've also got Wolf Point West and Wolf Point South growing up. I love that they're still calling it Wolf Point. This is what the early pioneers and settlers used to call this space. Exactly why is kind of lost to history now, but probably just a reference to the fact that there were so many wolves in the environment back then. In fact, they used to have a holiday. Every winter, they would shut down all of the businesses one day a year so everybody could help chase wolves out of the woods and into the ice on the lake. According to reports, they only ever caught one of them, and the wolf just kind of got onto an ice drift and sailed away and was later seen in Michigan or something. So that was how the story went anyway. Right over here, there used to be a place called the Sagan Ash Hotel run by a guy named Mark Bobine. Used to say, I keep the tavern like hell and I play the fiddle like the devil. Really, I think it was across the river from here. But one thing there, they would rent you a blanket, but if you fell asleep under it, they would give it to somebody else who wasn't too asleep to notice. It wasn't just to be a jerk either. It was just, getting clean laundry must have been a real trick at the time. Little things like that we don't always think of anymore. Right ahead of us there, this pink building is the old cold storage warehouse from 1907. And to do cold storage in those days, the walls were 3 feet thick. They were stuffed with frozen horsehair, frozen cork, and pipes pumping ammonia and some kind of ammonia mixture through there as a coolant. Now, when Harry Weese, the architect, decided in the 1970s that he wanted to turn these into condos and lofts, he had to haul away 500 train car loads of frozen horsehair. He had to add all of the windows. As we get up a little bit closer to it, you'll see like these little stars all over it, and those aren't designs, those are helping to hold the building together. It would have been a lot easier and really probably a whole lot cheaper just to tear the building down and put up a new one. But for one thing, the greenest building in almost every circumstance is one that's already there. And also, Harry Weese was a very preservation-minded architect. They used to say, never stand next for Harry Weese for 5 entire minutes. Otherwise, he might have you declared a landmark. Then you'll have to get a public hearing every time you want to change your haircut or something. Now, we'll cover his buildings, the River Cottages over here on the left. He was also a very innovative architect in his own right. But first, we have to have a quick moment of silence here as we go underneath the bridge. This is the bridge where about 15 years ago, the Dave Matthews Band's tour bus decided to stop on the bridge and let all of the sewage off of their bus and onto a boat below. I was not there that dreadful day, but we remember. We remember. It's also a very low bridge. I always feel like one of these days I'm going to get my head knocked off there and then I'll be a part of the ghost tours. One of the stories on the ghost tours is eventually going to open with, so our old tour guide was an idiot. And I'll be the headless tour guide of the Dave Matthews Band Poop Bridge. All right, let's turn this boat around. On the right, there are the Kinsey Townhouses. Some of the boat tour companies, you have to go off mic when you go by this place. I think it's because the Kinsey Park Townhouses are paying the boss off. But I never saw a nickel of that, so I'd talk if I feel like it. Don't pay the boss, pay the guides. Now, straight ahead of us, you can see this bridge that's just standing upright. That's the old Kinsey Street Railroad Bridge. When it was built, it was the largest steel drawbridge in the world, and at the time, it went up and down about 30 times a day to let boats through. Down when the trains went by, up when the boats went by. By the 1990s, only one train was still using it, just one train going to the old Sun-Times building, and then when that one stopped, they just left it upright full time. I've been hearing for years that once a year they lower it down, but I never seem to be around when they do it. They lower it down just to make sure they still can. And over around it, there's like a Saddam Hussein hiding place underneath it. Another good one right there, actually, to the right. Right here on the right, the River Cottages by Harry Weiss. These were designed, they opened in 1990, designed to echo the look of the sailboats and schooners they used to sail up to Wolf Point back in the old days. And 3 of the 4, last I checked, were still owned by the original owners who bought them in 1990. One of them listed and sold almost immediately a few years back for about $2.5 million, I think. And I love that it happened. Because it happened, we got to see a real estate listing showing us what they look on the inside, which is very Pee-wee's Playhouse, is about the easiest way to say it. Coming up here, the bend in the river. The bending building is called River Bend, appropriately. Mansionettes down below, condos up top. And this middle section here is the parking garage. But it's such a narrow building, you can't turn cars around in there. There's an elevator that brings the cars up to the different levels. Car elevators are something we've been experimenting with in Chicago since the 1920s. We're trying to cram a really lot of people. Like the entire population of Wyoming is crammed pretty much into the area that we're sailing around today. The city itself has about the whole population of Iowa crammed in a much smaller place. So we had to be very creative. Like you see these little porthole looking things, those are actually fans pumping out diesel exhaust fumes from the railroad tracks that are hidden down below here. It was a thing in the 20s called air rights. The railroads sold the rights to the air over their tracks for people to build on. They just had to keep leaving room for the train to go through somehow and still have the building be structurally stable, which wasn't easy, but they did it over and over again. And speaking of structurally appearing unstable, but seems to work, right ahead of us is 150 North Riverside by Getch Partners. This one that looks like it's got a giant wedge chopped out of it. One day I will get the motions for this thing down. Now, this plot of land where that one went up was empty for years and years and years because nobody could think of anything cost-effective to do with the space. Everything has to be X number of feet back from the water these days. They got a few feet beyond that. They'd run into railroad tracks and streets. So finally, Getch Partners came up with what was called a core-supported structure. The idea is you have everything kind of, all the weight is structured in the center of it. They just had this shaft in the middle that rose up until it was out of everything's way, then flared outward, creating their own space up in the sky. Now, core-supported structures like this are not unheard of. Harry Weiss built one in the 70s, but they don't usually go up 700 feet like that. You might have heard that tall buildings are known to sway in the wind a little bit. Officially, they don't sway, what they do is give, but if you're not an engineer, that means the same thing. So up on top is what is called a liquid-tuned mass dampers, this giant tank of water that could, where the wind blows one way, the water flows the other to keep the whole building steady. It's a tremendous feat of engineering, but it's really such simple physics. It's like something the ancient Egyptians might have done, if they had access to steel frame construction in the first place, which they didn't, so nya. There's another air rights building coming up over here on the right. Just about everything down this row is air rights. The metro trains run right underneath all of this. This is the Boeing Building, originally the Morton Salt Building. And the trick they had with this one is underneath it is where the tracks cross over each other. So that left them a lot less room than they normally would have for support beams to hold the building up. So they had to be kind of creative here. They have it held up from above. And when you see the whole building, it's kind of boot-shaped. We're going by the smaller portion of it right here, as you see. Up on the top of that, there are some steel trusses that attach it to the next building over. So this one is effectively being dangled off of the taller portion. Coming up, of course, Washington Boulevard, of course, named for Frederick Boom Boom Washington. Brooklyn student in the 1970s. Famous for his catchphrase, "Hi there." One of the easiest catchphrases ever. Now, from Halliburton Road in the 1920s, the Chicago Daily News Building. One of the first skyscrapers to have a public plaza out in the front, which was kind of a new idea at the time. This wasn't such a nice area back then. In fact, there's a terrific novel called Knock on Any Door by Willard Motley from the 40s. The origin of the phrase, live fast, die young, and have a good-looking corpse. Roughly every page of this book, somebody is getting mugged in the Chicago Daily News Plaza. Not every page, but close enough. The Daily News went out of business back in the 1970s. The Field family had been owning it, the Marshall Field family, but they sold it off so Ted Field could go to make movies, the first of which was Revenge of the Nerds. So the same family fortune that built the merchandise bar back there also made Revenge of the Nerds, a movie that really does not hold up so well. All right, here we have got some modernism, Gateway 1 and Gateway 2 by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. Now, these were not Mies van der Rohe buildings, but they were so enamored of his style and his philosophy at Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill that Frank Lloyd Wright used to call those guys Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill the three blind mice. But on a really good modernist building like these ones, you can never see the seams, you can never see the screws. They were designed to look modern, and they still look about as modern now as they did when they were built 60 years ago. And there's something to be said for that. A lot of 60-year-old buildings look like 60-year-old buildings now. These ones still fit my concept of what a skyscraper was supposed to look like just from reading old Batman comics when I was a kid. Just beyond that is Gateway 3, where they start moving into postmodernism, where they started thinking, all these plain black rectangles or buildings are boring. Why don't we try something different? This is a very early example where they tried to do, a white rectangle instead. It was a start. They were just starting to get creative with that kind of stuff. Skidmark, Borings, and Merrill. I like that. I call them Skidmore, Borings, and Merrill. You can also see the bridge tender houses here. Some of these were not actually used by bridge tenders, they're just kind of there for symmetry. But at least one of them was always used in the old days for the people who were in charge of raising the bridges up and down. Straight ahead of us, another example of a building where the outside reflects the inside, this small one with the X's. When this opened in the 1970s, the Tribune described it as looking like a small black box heavily strapped with steel cables, as though it were containing something volatile that had to be held inside or else it would explode. What a description. It's a pretty good description of what used to go on in there. It was where they used to have one of the commodities trading market where guys would yell and scream at each other over oat, corn, and barley deals. Now there's a bakery on one side and a gym on the other. Which do you go to first? It's like I used to live by a place that did kickboxing and massage. What do you do first? This one coming up with the design on it used to be a very good example of bad modernism. This is modernism, but you can see all of the seams, you can see all of the screws. It used to be a plain beige slab over the elevator shaft that the Chicago Reader called conspicuously dull. So they finally got tired of being conspicuously dull and added this design. And this design is a map of the river. The red dot there is the "You Are Here" portion. So we could actually plot the rest of the course of this tour just by looking at this building, which I love that they did that. It increased the value of properties within the building exponentially. Just a little bit of design can go a really long way on these things. And now I get to talk about something good about the building instead of just how awful the building is, which is great because I would rather talk about something I love than something I hate anytime. Now, certain times I don't really have a choice. There's only one route you can really take on the river tours. Coming up on the right here, this is one that for a long time I was telling people I thought might be cursed. This is the old post office. Built in 1930 by Graham Anderson, Probst & White at the same time as they were doing the merchandise mart back behind us a ways. This was the most modern post office in the world when it was built. You can see some of the railroad tracks down below. People were just amazed that it was an air rights building where they could just drop mail down into the trains. They even experimented with having auto gyros, early helicopters going back and forth to the airport, landing on the roof. Now, of course, by the 1960s, though, it had kind of outlived its usefulness. Technology kept on moving, but the building stayed put. In the 90s, they built a more modern post office a little further down. This one sat empty for over 20 years. There's offices in there now. They finally got it redone. There's offices, and there was talk of having a rooftop park. I got to check out whatever became of that. It was really kind of surprising they went for offices, though. A lot of the proposals with it had been about mixed use, more residential stuff, which is also like what you see over in these newer buildings over here. That's really been the trend the last few years, is mixed use, apartments, retail, and office space. A little further down, we are going to get to the Roosevelt Collection buildings, which is a movie theater plus mall shops plus apartments. Live, play, work is what they're calling it these days. But if you think about it, that really just goes back to Bertrand Goldberg and his idea of a city within a city. Now, if you remember Marina City and his plan to have everything you need right there, you might recognize his architectural style coming up ahead of us over here on the left at River City. Now, River City, when he initially designed this, he wanted it to curve all the way back to this bridge that we're going under right now, and he wanted it to be 75 feet tall. The projected was there would be enough apartments for about 250,000 people living in the thing. But that's possibly why it's a very late example of brutalism. It was designed back in the 60s that way, kept getting progressively scaled back until finally the 1980s when they built it like this. Still has that cool science fiction look about it. It is still kind of a city within a city. It's mostly apartments, but there's a doctor's office in there, there's a preschool, there's a grocery store that's about 50% booze last time I was in there, right across the hall from the preschool. Once again, Bertrand Goldberg. They do in fact have trouble right there in River City. That's trouble with a capital T, that rhymes with C, and that stands for cell phone coverage. Now, one thing I get asked a lot on these is, which of these buildings was Al Capone in? And for the longest time, I would say none. We can't trace him to any of these buildings on the tour. But I was wrong. I did find one that we can see for just a second that I can trace Al Capone to. People love to tell stories about him having parties in skyscrapers and stuff, but he kept a much lower profile than that, really. Most of the places we can trace him are like places where he had lunch in his attorney's office, places where he had his underwear designed. But if you look down the road here just a bit, you will see for 1 second a clock tower off in the distance. That is Dearborn Station, where Al Capone changed trains on the way to prison. It was also in that building the only time that he and Elliot Ness are ever known to have been in the same place at the same time. We'll proceed up a little bit. Right in front of us, them smokestacks reaching like the arms of God into the beautiful sky of soot and clay, in Springsteen's words. A power plant by Graham Anderson Probst and White. Still provides power and steam to 3 or 4 buildings nearby, as I understand it. I've never actually seen anything coming out of the smokestacks, but maybe that's just not how it works anymore. All right, let's turn this boat around. Roosevelt Collection, live, work, and play. Now, just over on the other side of the river, if you were standing on this building staring across, you would actually be looking at right about where Mrs. O'Leary's cottage and barn would have been in 1871, where the Great Chicago Fire began. Move this down a little bit. 1871, the barn caught fire. The fire ended up jumping across the river, burning all the way up, destroying about 16,000 buildings between here and Lincoln Park. To this day, nobody really knows what started the fire. For years, everybody blamed poor old Mrs. O'Leary. Really, that was fake news. That was the Chicago Times here. They referred to Mrs. O'Leary as a 70-year-old Irish hag and claimed that she had burned the city down on purpose. Really just because the Chicago Times liked ripping on the Irish almost as much as they liked ripping on other ethnic groups. There was a Mrs. O'Leary. She was only about 35. Nobody really knows what started the fire. It might have been a meteor. Well, probably it wasn't a meteor, but people like to say that it might have been a meteor. There were some stories about kids sneaking in to steal milk from a cow and dropping a clay pipe in the ashes. It could have just been something like a lightning strike. In fact, I went on another boat tour once, and they said, we now know for sure it was a lightning strike. We don't know for sure. But it was a kind of an accident waiting to happen at that point. Chicago was all made out of wood. It had been a very dry year. If you look at October 1871 newspapers, ads for fire insurance like crazy. But that was Wilbur F. Story who started the Mrs. O'Leary story, or at least spread it around the most. You all know what I think of that guy. There's videos of me dancing on that grave. The cemetery has begged me not to do that anymore. I told him I wouldn't. I lied. Right ahead of us, this one with all of the balconies is sometimes called the Minecraft Building by kids, or for adults, the Morse Code Building. The balconies kind of look like dots and dashes of Morse code. It's if you could actually translate it, it says MTRDSDEE over and over again. Like Mr. T, D, Mr. T, D. No, MTR, no, that doesn't work at all. It's actually called 225 Van Buren by Ralph Johnson, architect. Good time to talk about postmodernism, the kind that came after modernism. Really, anytime you see a building and don't know quite how to describe it, you can just go, oh, how postmodern. You'll probably be right. Like that one with all the balconies is postmodern. Off in the distance, 190 LaSalle with the green roof on top and the steeply pitched eaves. Looks totally different, but also postmodern. And of course, directly to the right of that, this one you can see with the statue on top. And I'll add another picture of that one. The Board of Trade by Halliburton and Root from 1930 is maybe my favorite building in all of Chicago, especially when they get it all lit up like that at night. It's got this very cool Batman Gotham City kind of vibe to it. In fact, it was the Bruce Wayne building back in Batman Begins. Up on top, the statue is Ceres, the Roman goddess of grains and agriculture. Doesn't have a face. There's a lot of urban legends as to why. The real reason is just it's an Art Deco thing. Clean lines. They're keeping things smooth. John Story, the sculptor, did say most people wouldn't be able to see the face anyway, but he didn't think nobody was ever going to build a taller building than this. It was the tallest in Chicago for a good 20 years. So coming up in front of us, you can see this thing with the circular thing on top. That is more postmodernism by Cohn, Peterson, and Fox, the rock stars of Chicago architecture in the postmodern era. That is 311 South Wacker. When it was built, it was said to be the tallest building in the world that didn't have a name. That record has been taken several times by New York since, but places that just go by their address. There's also a lot of legends stating that it was supposed to be designed based on somebody's wedding ring or something. Really, it was a postmodern version of the Tribune Building. That's something postmodernists love to do, was take a design and update it for the 90s. We'll see the Tribune Building again later on. So it no longer holds the record for tallest building in the world without a name, and that kind of gets my goat. Frankly, folks, I want that one back. It was first broken by 432 Park in New York, which is such a hideous building. And a mess on the inside, too. But speaking of records, right behind that one, rising above all the other buildings as sure as Kilimanjaro rises like Olympus above the Serengeti, the Sears Tower has 1,451 feet tall. The official name is now the Willis Tower, but locals still refer to it as the Sears under penalty of a torture. On a clear day from the observation deck, you can see 4 states. Today's selections are Wisconsin, Indiana, Nebraska, and New Jersey. And Gene, over on Twitch, the population I was referring to is just the portion that we're sailing past right now. Certainly the whole of Chicago has a much higher population than Wyoming. Manhattan has the same population as North and South Dakota, crammed into a space the size of Urbandale, Iowa. But here we've got the better view of the Sears. The engineer Fosler Kahn was a developer of what is called bundled tube construction. What you're seeing with the Sears is really 9 of those plain black rectangle buildings all bundled up together. One of them wouldn't hold up to the wind too well, but 9 of them, they all strengthen each other. Like America, they are stronger together. In the early 1970s, when it was built for Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, 1,000-foot-tall buildings had kind of gone out of fashion. There had been a rush to build a few of them in the 1930s, but by the 70s, people decided that they weren't really that cost-effective anymore. Bundled tube construction made them cost-effective again and really revived skyscrapers altogether. When it was built at 1,451 feet tall, it was the tallest building in the world, and it held on to that record for quite a while, for over 20 years, which is really a very long time for any building to hold on to that record. And it would have held it longer too, but there's a weird little quirk in architecture rules that antennas don't count towards the overall height. If you include the antennas, it's over like 1,700 feet, but antennas don't count, spires do. So even if your spire is just a plain metal pole that looks like a Tinker toy on top of a building that doesn't do anything, that counts towards the height, but the antennas do not. And of course, nowadays, by now, even if we didn't include spires, it wouldn't be the tallest building in the world anymore. Here we'll get a full view of it. Now, plus the antennas is in the 1,700-foot range. But currently the tallest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is 2,700 feet. So like the Sears plus the antennas, then another 1,000 feet on top of that. And it's already about to lose its record to the Jeddah Tower in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which will be 3,200 feet. If they ever get it finished. It's, right now, it's been stalled for years. They've got like the first 1/10 of it built, and now it's just kind of sitting there. But for the longest time, the Sears was still the tallest occupied floor in the United States. It just lost that one to Central Park Tower in New York. However, the Burj Khalifa, the Jeddah Tower, and Central Park Tower were all designed by Chicago architect Adrian Smith, so we still win. And Adam Street here was named after me. There's supposed to be an apostrophe. I keep telling the alderman. He says, Adam, quit being such a grammar snob. I say, no, that makes me a punctuation snob. You don't get it. It's a thing we have, me and the alderman. The alderman and I. Whatever. All right, so we've talked about how they like the outside of the building to reflect what goes on the inside. This white one here is the Hartford Insurance Building. Here, the strength of the exterior stone is protecting the fragility of the interior glass, the same way the strength of a Hartford insurance policy protects your fragile life. Maybe. No. There's not a lot of good data out there about the Hartford Insurance Building. Hartford Insurance is one of the insurance companies that H.H. Holmes tried to swindle. I don't think he actually got anything out of them, but we will be covering that on Thursday night on the upcoming H.H. Holmes tour. So please do check that one out if you're enjoying this one. Coming up over here, another one. We'll get back to postmodernism for a second. With this 1980s building, CME, the Gold Commodities and Mercantile Exchange Building. This was another place where people would yell and scream at each other over oat, corn, and barley deals. That was all done in the central portion here, which doesn't have any support beams on its own. It's being held up by the two towers on the side. The two towers were designed very specifically with executives in mind. Executives always want a corner office. Usually you get 4 corner offices per floor. Here, with all of these extra angles, you get something like 16 corner offices per floor. That way, nobody has to feel left out and everyone gets to be a winner. Which sounds like a great setup for a joke about millennials, but it's actually for baby boomers. I'm a couple of years older than the millennials myself by most metrics. Usually they don't count people born under Jimmy Carter as millennials. But then again, when they were first talking about Generation X, I thought they were like 10, 15 years older than me. So, we'll see. Now we get back to some Art Deco mixed with Beaux-Arts style with Graham Anderson, Probst, and White's Lyric Opera Building, the Civic Opera Building from 1929. Up on top was a penthouse where lived Samuel Insull, the utilities kingpin who built the place. Number of urban legends about him making it shaped like a throne or having it built for his wife who was an aspiring opera singer. They're kind of confusing him with Harold Fowler McCormick, who did leave his wife for an opera singer of questionable talents. Or just confusing him with the plot of Citizen Kane. But he ended up losing all of his money. This place opened about a week after the stock market crash that kicked off the Great Depression. And it was still successful for a while. The effects of that stock market crash didn't filter down right away. But he ended up losing all his money and fleeing to Greece. Now this is a new one by Getch Partners. If you look down below there, you can see these little waves of corrugated metal. Those are leftovers from the General Growth Properties building that used to be on that site. I always kind of liked this one. It was very, very unpopular and not using what we call the best and tallest possible use of the space, but I liked it because it just looks so different from everything else on the water. Whereas the new one by Getch Partners, it's okay, I guess. It's certainly using more use of the space. Now, right behind it is a Ralph Johnson design for 123 Wacker, which was supposed to be a modernist take or a postmodernist take on the look of the Civic Opera Building. It's like the Civic Opera Building, but rebuilt for the 80s. And designed entirely with computers, which was still a novelty at the time. Now, even now, like guys like Otto Stark will be like, forget computers, you must feel the whole building with your hands. Right ahead of us is another one, probably not using the best and tallest possible use of the space, but we love this one, the Great Lakes Building by Halliburton and Roche. couple of guys who came out of William LeBaron Jennings' office. It's not using the best and tallest possible use of the space, but I hope this one sticks around because it adds a nice splash of color right when we kind of need one. It's a Halliburton Roche. That's historic, all by itself. I'll pour myself the rest of my tea here. Well, everybody duck under this bridge. This is a particularly low one. This is the one where I'm most likely to lose my head at some point. And I can't remember what they eventually built under this frame. There was a thing that looked like a postmodern hammock for a while there. But here we've got 333 Wacker, Cohn, Peterson, and Fox, the rock stars of 80s postmodernism. This one tends to win a lot of popularity contests. It's really a very simple building, but there's a lot of little subtle touches to it. Like it curves right along with the curve of the river. Of the two colors of water, at least one of them usually matches the color of the water. There's also octagon-shaped support beams that match the octagons over across the river at the merchandise mart, over in the corners there. Not to mention some circular cutouts around the place that tie it into like the Reed Murdock building clock to the building next door, etc. Of course, this one is probably best known for being the building where Ferris Bueller's dad works in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was a brand new building at the time. They never do explain how Ferris Bueller's dad thought he was going to get home by 5:30. Because they lived in Cameron's house is in Highland Park. We must assume that Ferris's house is also somewhere around Highland Park. There's no way you're getting from here to Highland Park by 5:30 if you leave at 5. Unless you have I've been saying for years I want to do a whole other movie called Ferris Bueller's Dad's Commute that'll explain it using Russian spies, secret tunnels, maybe a wormhole or two. You know. Right ahead of us with the tall columns at the bottom, kind of an Art Deco take on the old Beaux-Arts columns. That's the old Halliburton route Chicago Sun-Times building. Still the best of the 3 Sun-Times buildings that have existed. It was originally the old Chicago Daily Times building, which was your classic mobster crime tabloid newspaper. The kind where you could just imagine the newspaper reporters talking like this the whole time, making sure they found out what color the dead man's socks were. Up there, that's going by it is Wacker Drive. There's Upper Wacker Drive, there's Lower Wacker Drive, and there's Lower Wacker Drive beneath that. Having a bi-level road going around the business district was part of Daniel Burnham's plan for Chicago. Burnham was one of our great architects, but really better remembered as a city planner for a long time. We're now back to talking about him more as an architect because all of the work he did on the World's Fair. The World's Fair used a whole lot of Greek revival stuff in 1893. You can still see the echoes of it here at Burnham and Burnham's Builders Building. Those were his sons. You can see that row of columns up there, a colonnade of columns. Those are everywhere if you know where to look for them in Chicago, including at the Marshall Fields down on State Street, which incidentally is one of the few places that I can actually trace Al Capone around Chicago. We know from his trial that he used to get all of his underwear made at Marshall Fields. Custom-tailored union suits made out of ladies' glove silk, which the jurors, who mostly came from small country towns, just thought was hilarious. Now, I can't quite trace Capone himself to the building over to the right of us here, the LaSalle Wacker building. I can trace his gang here, though. 33, right after Capone went to jail, they were using a room on the 6th floor of this as an office space under the leadership of Frank the Enforcer Nitti. Cops busted into that, shot Frank the Enforcer Nitti up pretty good. They didn't kill him, but it wasn't like he lived to a ripe old age or anything. Very few of the gangsters did. It was not a job where you had a long life expectancy. But you did get to buy really nice underwear while you were here. Here we got 77 Wacker, the United Building, 1990 to Stefano and Partners, Ricardo Bofill, the architect. I'll get another view of this here. Here we've got a postmodern take on those rows of Greek columns, even a Greek-style pediment roof up top. 4 of the columns extend all the way down, tying the entire building together. Endlessly classical and endlessly modern at the same time. I don't think that one's ever going to go out of style. 111 to the right of it. And a nice little view of the Riverwalk here. Straight ahead, this cone-shaped thing is by Harry Weiss, 17th Church of Christ scientist. Beyond that, you can see this, all those gray things. The pixelated thing is supposed to be a mural of a pixelated version of the river. Really, to me, it just kind of looks like a paint sample building. With a green and gold one, the Carbide and Carbon Building by Burnham and Burnham, Daniel Burnham's sons. The builders wanted that to be the color of an old champagne bottle. With the gold on top, it really does look kind of like an Art Deco version of a champagne bottle, which I thought was an urban legend for years until somebody sent me a clip of Burnham's diary saying, yes, the builders would like it to be a dark gold color like an old champagne bottle. I was prepared to say that was an urban legend for years. So, of course, we have a lot of urban legends about alcohol in Chicago around 1930. That was Prohibition. We had a lot of speakeasies here, but it's hard to know how many because illegal speakeasies are not known for keeping great paperwork. So we end up with a lot of urban legends, the most famous of which is possibly here at the Jewelers Building, one of the last of the great Beaux-Arts style buildings. About every other boat tour says Capone had a speakeasy under the dome called the Stratosphere Club. Now, the Stratosphere Club was a real place. We've been there on the time travel pub crawls. I got a matchbook. This was at a time when the building was called the Pure Oil Building, but it didn't open until years after Capone went to prison. And it wouldn't have been a speakeasy either. Booze was legal by then. Though they still charged like they were selling bootleg liquor in there, as I understand it. It was a very expensive place. Plus, it took like 4 elevators to get up there. All right, here we've got the Mather Tower, the skinny skyscraper. They were planning to make 2 of those, but 1930 happened, and they ran out of money for it. Over on the left here is kind of a rougher view than we had before of the London Guarantee Building by Alfred Alschuler. Alschuler built buildings all over this city, but you can never just tell that you're looking at one. They all look totally different. You can never just look at one and say, oh, that looks like an Alfred Alschuler. Now, Harry Weiss used to say that he didn't like to repeat himself. That's why none of his buildings look alike. You could never just look at a building and say, hey, there's a Harry Weiss. And coming up here, we've got the Gothic Chicago Tribune Building. And we'll see that one again, but before I really get into that, I want to talk about the building that's about to emerge next to it. That's coming behind the Wrigley Building here. This is the old Medina Athletic Club, now the Intercontinental Hotel. There's a story that goes around in the building that where that yellow onion dome is now, they originally planned to have a landing pad for Zeppelins, blimps, which never would have worked even if they tried it, but I've always kind of imagined that there must have been somebody on every board of directors going, well, we got to have a landing pad. In 5 years, everybody's going to be traveling around in Zeppelins. If we don't have a landing pad, we will be obsolete. But blocking our view of that now, Chicago Tribune Building by Howells and Hood, 1927, one of the last of the great Gothic skyscrapers. Now, the Chicago Tribune still operated out of the building until just a few years ago. A couple of years back, a friend of mine who worked there said, hey, my key card still works. Let's go in and break stuff. So we did. All right here, my favorite, we're not supposed to call this one Art Deco. This is the NBC Tower by Adrian Smith. It's from the 80s, so we're supposed to call it Echo Deco or Art Deco Revival or just plain Post-Modernism. But with its clean lines, streamlined verticality, and simple geometric art, it is more Art Deco than Art Deco. That is my favorite Adrian Smith building right there. We'll take a quick look here at this plain white rectangle one, currently known as the Aeon Building, originally the Standard Oil Building. Now, I'll close up. We've talked a lot about Harry Weiss already today, but Harry Weiss knew that they'd already picked out their architect for this building, but they were having meetings with other ones, such as himself, probably just because it looked good to investors that they were talking to all of the prominent architects. So he went in for the meeting with them, knowing he wasn't going to get the job, but I guess figuring, hey, I'll get a good meal out of it, plus it allowed him to troll them a bit. So they sat him down and said, now, Mr. Weiss, we here at Standard Oil are thinking the building ought to be made out of beautiful, gleaming white marble. What do you say? He said, well, that's one way that you could do it. But I was thinking you could go with black granite. That way, it'll match all of your oil spills. So he didn't get the job. But they originally had it clad in a thin veneer of white marble, but it fell apart. They had to replace it with granite at huge expense, so always listen to Harry Weiss. And the classic punchline here is never take marble for granite. Right here, the St. Regis Hotel building, formerly known as Wanda Vista Tower, just opening up now, designed by Jeannie Gang, the Chicago architect. Earlier, she did one here in Chicago called Aqua that was briefly the tallest building in the world designed by a woman. She totally took that record back with Aqua Tower. which is wasn't quite finished yet when I filmed this a couple of years ago, but now it is. It's about 1,200 feet tall, just going right up into the sky here. You can see that empty space there, though. That still remains. That's called the blow-through floor. See, tall buildings like this, as I mentioned, do kind of wobble a little bit. The blow-through is a space that allows wind to blow through. You got to be really careful. It can turn the entire building into one big whistle. So, all right, everybody, we will wrap it up there. We've just about made the entire rotation. Want to go ahead and plug the upcoming events? Thursday night, we are doing H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, possibly my signature presentation, but I haven't done it in months. Next Sunday morning at 10, come right back here for Gold Coast Tales. But then I'll be rushing away from that because Sunday, in person, noon next week, Graceland Cemetery. Go to Adam Chicago or MysteriousChicago.com for all of the details on all of those things. Should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, etc., go to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago for all of your Mysterious Chicago needs. And with that, everybody, I will put the Betty Goodman back on, and we will just hang out. So thanks for joining me, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. All right, the comments have been coming in just kind of sporadically for me. Yeah, they're okay on the phone. But like the last one I've got on my regular app is Gene's thing about the population of Wyoming. Thanks, Octavio. Thanks, Lisa. And of course, that's kind of a shortened version. The full-length one is a bit longer. Thanks, Eleanor. Well, you know, I'm half the talking head work on I Was There. Kathy, you know, I can watch this one over and over again, too. It's a good thing, too, because I used to do it about 150 times a season. Oh, Paula had a good trip. Thanks, Denise. Chris, yes, it is. This has been sitting on my parents' shelves for years, but they're in the process of moving now. We used to have it on. It's a suction thing. We used to have it on the car window. It's missing a suction cup now. Thank you, Gina. I gotta get this arranged. It's kind of early for booking stuff out for October, but I might as well get on it. Betty, congrats. Kathy, I haven't heard when the Al Capone I Was There will be on. Dana, today I am using the Big Sleep mug. Octavio, I know. We haven't had a disconnect mid-tour like that in a long time. I remember Ronnie's birthday. I do, yeah. Carol, the old fashions were delicious.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the Bugle Call Rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune.
Thanks, Brad.
A Million.
We blame Pullman for a lot of stuff here. I'd be happy to blame Cyrus McCormick instead, frankly. Yeah, Todd, there was a whole freeze right when I was mentioning that building. Karen, yeah, me too. I got so much to do this month. It's in addition to the tour schedule, I got some school groups, I got some ghostwriting to do that I can't really talk about, but it's going to make me miserable. picture on the shelf next to me, that dribbly. My parents had this made for me. It's me as a Simpsons character. Late last night, I watched the Simpsons episode from season 23, The Book Job, about gang writing a tween lit novel, which is maybe my favorite episode. I'll tell you, that would just be too real. I can make this thanks thing a lot smaller than this. Of course, I do want you to donate and everything, but it doesn't need to be this obtrusive. Let me go find Miles. We haven't seen Miles yet today. Miles! Was on the couch.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about it. Trucking.
Here's the man himself. Beverly, I wish I had better specific stories about the bridge houses. Well, Miles was just relaxing with Priya and Ronnie. But he's got to be on every episode, so... all over town. Now, Layla, I think, has a bit more on bridge houses than I do. She did a talk on bridge disasters and safety a while ago. Well, here he comes back again. I think he might be too sleepy to jump up, but he'll probably prove me wrong there in a minute. Oh, thanks, Kelly. I think it's working too. Is the John Lennon shirt from Get Back. Jordana hooked me to the existence of this. Thanks, Betsy. Well, Kathy, Layla will be on effing on April 1st to do her annual Completely Untrue tour.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Oh, here he comes. Anybody take the bet? Miles, look what you're doing. You're knocking stuff off of the wall again. Whoa. All right, everybody. Now, this is kind of a shorter post-show hang than normal, but I have got a lot going on over the next couple of weeks. Quick plug for the upcoming stuff that I got to get working on right this second, or some of it is. Thursday night, H.H. Holmes' The True History. I got to get a TikTok up to promote that tomorrow. Gold Coast Tales, a week from today. And then 2 hours after that one starts, I'm going to rush down to Graceland to do an in-person tour at Graceland Cemetery. It might be the only free weekend I got this month, so I got to take advantage. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody, at MysteriousChicago.com for all of the links to tickets and everything. So until then, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. Have a great day. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tour saying to stay safe, stay strong, and of course, if you can, stay spooky, everybody.